The conference room buzzed with energy, the hum of conversation filling the air as executives, partners, and employees gathered for what was supposed to be an insightful industry meeting. I sat near the front, scribbling down a few notes from the morning sessions, completely unaware of the storm about to hit. My boss, Alan, had been the keynote speaker for the event. Charismatic, successful, and incredibly arrogant, he commanded attention wherever he went. But today, something about him seemed different, even more smug than usual. As he strode up to the podium for his final presentation, I noticed the sly smirk on his face. "We have a special showcase today," Alan announced, his voice booming through the microphone. The screen behind him flickered to life, displaying the company logo. I assumed it was a video highlighting our latest project. But what followed was the stuff of nightmares. The footage began with a grainy, dimly lit room. My heart sank as I realized the bed, the sheets, and the figures moving in the video were unmistakably familiar. It took a few seconds to process what I was seeing. There, on the screen, was my wife, Sarah, with Alan. The moans, the sounds, the absolute gut-wrenching sight of them intertwined, it was undeniable. The room went silent. I felt the blood drain from my face, the air sucked out of my lungs as the realization hit me like a truck. Alan was standing there, watching the audience's reaction, clearly relishing in the shock and disgust spreading through the room. I wanted to get up, to stop the video, but I was frozen. Trapped. Humiliated. Murmurs filled the room as people exchanged horrified glances. Some stared at me with a mixture of pity and disbelief, others were too stunned to react. I could barely hear them over the sound of my own pulse thundering in my ears. My mind screamed at me to move, but I was rooted to my chair, my world crumbling around me. I caught a glimpse of Alan's satisfied grin, his gaze locked on mine, daring me to react. The video went on for what felt like an eternity, but in reality, it lasted less than 2 minutes. 2 minutes that destroyed everything. As it ended, Alan cleared his throat, breaking the tension. "This, my friends, is the true meaning of loyalty," he sneered, his voice dripping with venom. The room erupted in confusion, gasps, angry whispers, and the shuffling of chairs. But I still couldn't move. It was only when one of my colleagues placed a hand on my shoulder, urging me to leave, that I finally stood up. My legs felt weak, like they could give out at any moment. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, but all I could focus on was the pounding in my chest, the rage building inside me. Alan had orchestrated this. He had planned it. And my wife Sarah, she had been a part of it. Without a word, I pushed my way out of the room, the whispers and stares following me as I stumbled into the hallway. I didn't care where I was going, I just needed to get out of there. To breathe. To think. But how could I think when everything I had believed in my marriage, my life, was just shattered in front of my colleagues, my peers? I made it outside, gulping in the cool air, but the anger didn't dissipate. It festered, boiling beneath the surface. How could she do this to me? How could he do this to me? The humiliation, the betrayal, it was too much to handle. I had worked so hard to build my career, my marriage, only to have it all torn apart in the most public and degrading way possible. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't face them. I had to get away. That evening, after what felt like hours of driving aimlessly, I found myself sitting in my car in an empty parking lot. My phone had been vibrating non-stop, messages, missed calls, but I couldn't bring myself to answer any of them. I knew it was her. Sarah. She had to know by now that I had seen everything. That the whole world had seen everything. But what could she possibly say to make this right? A deep, primal rage burned inside me, and the only thing that kept me from breaking down completely was the thought of revenge. Alan had humiliated me, destroyed my marriage, and shown the world what kind of man he really was. But he wouldn't get away with it. I would make sure of that. And as for Sarah, she had made her choice. She had chosen to betray me in the most unforgivable way. There would be no forgiveness. Not for her. Not for him. But before I could even begin to plan my next move, the overwhelming exhaustion took over. The weight of everything that had happened crashed down on me all at once, and I felt my eyes growing heavy. Tomorrow, I told myself. Tomorrow, I would start to piece together the wreckage. Tomorrow, I would make them both pay. As I closed my eyes, my phone buzzed once more. This time, I glanced at the screen. It was Sarah. The message preview read, "Please let me explain. It was a mistake. Just once. I swear it will never happen again." I let out a bitter laugh, the sound hollow and empty in the silent car. Once. Just once. As if that made it any better. Tomorrow, I would deal with her. Tomorrow, everything would change. I don't know how long I sat in the car that night, the cold creeping into my bones as the hours passed. The streetlights flickered above, casting long shadows over the empty parking lot, but I was frozen in place, my mind racing, replaying the scene over and over again. The conference, Alan's smirk, the video, Sarah. Her message still glowed on my phone's screen. "Please let me explain. It was a mistake. Just once. I swear it will never happen again." A mistake. She called it a mistake. As if sleeping with my boss, could be excused as a one-time lapse in judgment. My knuckles were white from gripping the steering wheel, and my jaw ached from clenching it so hard. I needed answers, and I needed them now. I couldn't sit here any longer, stewing in my rage. I needed to confront her, to look her in the eye and demand an explanation. I didn't remember much of the drive home. The road was a blur, the houses and street signs passing in a haze. All I could think about was Sarah, sitting at home, waiting for me to read her pathetic excuses, probably rehearsing her lies for when I walked through the door. My pulse quickened with each mile, and by the time I pulled into the driveway, I was trembling with anger. The lights in the living room were on. She was there, probably pacing, wondering how I would react. But she had no idea what was coming. As I stormed up to the front door, I didn't even take a moment to breathe or gather my thoughts. The fury inside me had been building for hours, and there was no containing it any longer. I threw the door open so hard it slammed against the wall with a loud bang, rattling the pictures hanging in the hallway. Sarah, who had been sitting on the couch, jumped to her feet, her face pale and tear-streaked. Her hands trembled as she clutched her phone, her eyes wide with fear and guilt. She knew. She knew what was coming. "Why did you do that?" I roared, my voice shaking with the intensity of my emotions. My chest heaved, and I could barely keep myself from losing control completely. "Explain to me why." Sarah took a step back, her face contorted with guilt and panic. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out at first, just a pathetic whimper as she struggled to find an answer. Her lip quivered as fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "I am so sorry," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "It was only once. I swear, it was only once. I spat, advancing toward her, my hands trembling with the urge to grab something, to break something, to make her feel the pain I was feeling. "You let him do that to you, to us, and you think it being once makes it better?" She shook her head, her eyes darting between me and the floor, unable to hold my gaze. "It was a mistake. She cut herself off, sobbing into her hands, trying to steady her breath. "It was 10 days ago. It didn't mean anything, I swear." "I didn't 10 days?" I interrupted, my voice cracking with disbelief. My mind raced, doing the math. 10 days. 10 days she had been living with this secret, lying to my face every single day, pretending everything was normal, while she knew what she had done. "You've been lying to me this whole time. I didn't know what to do," she cried, finally looking up at me with pleading eyes. "I didn't want to hurt you. Alan, he wanted to ruin your life." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, but they didn't make sense. "Alan? What the hell does he have to do with this? You're the one who slept with him, Sarah." She winced at my words, clutching her stomach as if I had physically struck her. "He made me do it," she sobbed, shaking her head. "He said he could destroy you, that he could take everything from you. I didn't want to, but he kept pressuring me. I thought if I Her voice broke, and she collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. I thought if I gave him what he wanted, he would leave you alone. I stood there, stunned, trying to process what she was saying. My mind was spinning. Alan wanted to ruin my life? This wasn't just about the affair, it was something bigger. A plan. A calculated attack. But that didn't change the fact that Sarah had gone along with it. She had betrayed me, no matter what her reasons were. You're telling me, I said slowly, my voice dangerously calm, that you slept with him to protect me? She nodded through her sobs, but it only made me angrier. The rage that had momentarily cooled as I tried to understand her explanation flared back up, hotter than ever. I slammed my fist into the wall, the drywall cracking under the impact. That's bullshit, Sarah. You think I'm that stupid? You let him use you because you wanted to. Don't put this on him. Don't pretend this was for me. She flinched, curling up into herself as if my words were physical blows. No, it's not like that. I swear, she cried, her voice rising in desperation. He's been planning this for months, ever since you got that promotion. He hates you, Tom. He wanted to humiliate you, to destroy everything you've worked for. And I dash. She broke down into sobs again, unable to continue. I stood there, shaking with fury, my fists clenched at my sides. The image of Alan's smug face flashed in my mind. His arrogance, his confidence, he knew exactly what he was doing. He had set this whole thing in motion. But Sarah, she had been the one to betray me in the most personal, unforgivable way possible. It didn't matter what Alan's intentions were. She had chosen to be a part of it. I trusted you. I hissed, my voice barely above a whisper. For 10 years I trusted you. And you threw it all away for what? Because Alan wanted to play some sick game? She shook her head violently, reaching out toward me, but I recoiled from her touch. No, please. You have to believe me. It was just once, and I regretted it the moment it happened. I never wanted to hurt you, Tom. I love you so much. Love? I scoffed, my laugh hollow and bitter. You don't know what love is, Sarah. If you loved me, you wouldn't have let this happen. You would have come to me. You would have told me the truth instead of keeping it a secret like a coward. She collapsed onto the floor, her body racked with sobs, but I felt nothing but cold detachment as I watched her fall apart in front of me. I'll never forgive you for this, I said quietly, the finality of the words settling over both of us. I don't care what Alan did or what he threatened. You had a choice. And you made the wrong one. I turned and walked toward the door, her cries echoing in my ears. But I didn't look back. I couldn't. Not after everything she had done. The next morning, my body was on autopilot as I left the house, my thoughts consumed with one thing, Alan. He had orchestrated this entire nightmare, and now I needed answers. I needed to hear it from him. I needed to confront the man who had taken everything from me and shattered my life with his sick game. Sarah's tearful excuses from the night before still echoed in my mind, but they weren't enough to quiet the storm raging inside me. There was only one person responsible for this hell, and I wasn't going to let him get away with it. I didn't care about the consequences. I didn't care what anyone would think. I just knew that I had to face him, man to man. My car sped down the highway toward Alan's office, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. By the time I reached the building, my vision was red with fury, my heart pounding in my chest like a war drum. I stormed past the receptionist without a word, my eyes fixed on one door, Alan's office. When I pushed through the door, he was sitting behind his oversized desk, his back to me, casually staring out of the window as if nothing had happened. As if he hadn't just detonated a bomb in my life and walked away unscathed. I could see the reflection of his smug smile in the glass before he even turned around. He didn't even flinch when I slammed the door behind me. Tom. He greeted me, his voice smooth and infuriatingly calm, as if we were discussing business over coffee instead of the utter destruction of my life. I was wondering when you'd show up. I couldn't hold it in any longer. The rage that had been building inside me erupted, and I charged at him, my fists clenched. You son of a bitch! I roared, slamming my hands on his desk with enough force to send papers flying. Why did you do it? Why? Alan didn't react at first. He just sat there, leaning back in his chair, completely unfazed by my outburst. He let out a slow, mocking chuckle before finally meeting my eyes. Isn't it obvious? He asked, his tone dripping with condescension. I did it because I could. Before I could stop myself, my fist flew toward him, connecting with his jaw. The force of the punch sent him stumbling out of his chair, crashing to the floor. The satisfaction of hitting him barely registered before he scrambled to his feet, wiping blood from the corner of his mouth, a smirk still plastered across his face. You think that makes you a man, Tom? Alan sneered, his voice now laced with venom. You think throwing punches is going to fix what I've done to you? I lunged at him again, but this time he was ready. He caught my arm and twisted, shoving me against the wall with surprising strength. We struggled, grappling as my rage blinded me, but I managed to break free and landed another punch to his ribs. He grunted in pain but didn't back down. Instead, he laughed. Go ahead. Alan taunted between heavy breaths, circling around me. Hit me all you want. But it won't change the fact that I've already won. I lunged at him again, this time slamming him into the desk. Tell me why. I shouted, my voice raw with fury. Why did you do it? What did I ever do to you? Alan struggled under my grip, but the twisted grin never left his face. You really don't get it, do you? He hissed. You've always had everything, Tom. The perfect job, the perfect reputation, the perfect wife. And what did I have? I was the one in the shadows, always cleaning up after you, making sure you looked good while you climbed your way up the ladder. I stared at him, breathless, my grip tightening on his collar as his words began to sink in. This was never about Sarah. He continued, his voice rising with anger. She was just a pawn in my game. I wanted to tear you down, piece by piece, until you had nothing left. You ruined my life. I screamed, shaking him violently, my heart racing with the weight of his betrayal. You took everything from me, no. Alan said, his eyes narrowing. I exposed the truth. The truth about your wife, your marriage, and your fragile little ego. You built this perfect world around yourself, but it was all a lie. I just gave everyone a front row seat to the show. My blood boiled as his words cut through me, each one hitting like a knife to the chest. I shoved him harder against the desk, my fists aching to beat him into the ground. You're a pathetic, jealous coward. I growled through gritted teeth. You couldn't stand that I was better than you, so you destroyed me? Alan's grin widened. That's exactly right. And the best part? Everyone saw it. You'll never be able to come back from this, Tom. Everyone knows what your wife did, what kind of man you really are. The weak, pathetic man who couldn't keep control of his own life. I lost it. I slammed my fist into his face again, then again, until he was coughing and spitting blood. But it wasn't enough. I wanted to destroy him, to tear him apart the way he had torn my life apart. He swung back, landing a punch to my jaw, sending me stumbling back. We collided, our bodies slamming against the desk, fist flying, rage and hatred consuming both of us. You think this is over? I spat as I pinned him down again, my hands trembling from the fury coursing through me. You think you can just walk away after what you've done? Alan groaned, barely able to speak through the blood trickling from his mouth. I don't need to walk away. He rasped, grinning through the pain. I've already won. Before I could land another blow, the door flew open, and 2 security guards rushed in, pulling us apart. I fought against their grip, still trying to get to him, but they held me back as Alan slumped to the floor, laughing through his bloody teeth. Get him out of here. He ordered the guards weakly, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. He's lost it. They dragged me toward the door, but I wasn't done. I had more to say, more to scream at him. You think this is over? I yelled as they pulled me away. I'll make sure you pay for this. You'll lose everything, Alan. I swear to God you'll lose it all. But Alan just leaned back against his desk, breathing heavily, that smug grin still etched on his face. We'll see, Tom. He called after me as I was shoved out the door. We'll see. The sound of the office door slamming behind me echoed through the hallway as the guards shoved me out. My chest heaved, adrenaline still coursing through my veins. My fist ached from where they had connected with Alan's face, but it wasn't enough. I wanted more. I wanted to crush him, to tear apart everything he had built, just like he'd done to me. But in that moment, I was being dragged out like some deranged man who had lost control, and maybe I had. As the elevator doors closed in front of me, I could still hear Alan's smug, bloodied voice in my mind. I've already won. I didn't respond to the security guards as they led me out of the building and tossed me onto the curb like a piece of trash. The cold air bit into my skin, and for a moment, I just stood there, shaking with rage, staring up at the glass windows of the office tower where Alan still sat, likely licking his wounds but reveling in his victory. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I ignored it. I knew who it was. Sarah had been calling nonstop since last night, desperate to explain, to beg for forgiveness. I couldn't face her right now. Not after what Alan had just told me. Alan wasn't just trying to destroy me, he had planned it. He had been sitting there, watching me for months, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. His jealousy had festered, and Sarah had been the perfect pawn in his sick game. She had let herself be used, but Alan was the true mastermind. I began walking toward my car, my mind racing. I needed to figure out my next move. Alan was right about one thing: I couldn't hit him into submission. This wasn't something I could solve with violence. I needed to be smart, to take him down the way he had taken me down, ruthlessly, methodically. I needed to ruin him, just as he had ruined me. By the time I got home, the rage had simmered into a cold, hard determination. I stepped through the front door, and there she was, Sarah, sitting on the edge of the couch, her face pale, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She shot up the moment she saw me, her body trembling with fear and guilt. "Tom, please," she whispered, her voice hoarse from hours of sobbing. "Please talk to me." I stared at her, my jaw clenched. The image of her with Alan still played on a loop in my mind, and for a brief moment, I almost lost control again. But I couldn't afford to break down. Not now. Not before I had a plan. "Talk?" I said, my voice cold. "What's there to talk about? You let him destroy us." She collapsed into tears again, rushing toward me, but I stepped back, holding up a hand to stop her from getting too close. I couldn't bear to touch her right now, not after everything. "It wasn't like that," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "I thought I could stop him. I thought if I gave him what he wanted, he would leave you alone." I stared at her, my chest tightening with disgust. "You think I'm stupid enough to believe that? You let him use you, Sarah? And now look at us." She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "It was a mistake. A terrible mistake. I thought dash." She took a deep, shaky breath, trying to compose herself. "I thought I could fix it before it got out of hand. I didn't know he was going to do that." Her words stung, but I couldn't let her off that easily. "And now it's too late," I said quietly. "He ruined everything. Because of you." Sarah sobbed harder, her entire body shaking as she collapsed back onto the couch. I know I did this," she choked out between sobs. "But please, Tom, I'll do anything. I'll make it right, I swear." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "You can't fix this. Not this time." For a moment I just stood there, staring down at her broken form. Part of me wanted to believe her, to believe that she was truly sorry, that maybe we could find a way to move past this. But the other part of me, the part that had been betrayed so deeply, wanted nothing more than to make her feel the same pain I was feeling. I wanted to rip her apart, the way she had ripped apart our marriage. But I couldn't stay here. Not now. Not when the anger still clouded my mind. "I'm going out," I said, turning toward the door. "Don't wait up, Tom, please dash," she called after me, her voice raw with desperation. But I didn't stop. I slammed the door behind me and headed back to my car. I needed to clear my head, to think about my next move. Hours passed as I drove aimlessly around the city, my mind running over everything that had happened. Alan's plan had been so perfectly orchestrated. He had chosen Sarah because he knew it would break me. He had chosen the conference to make the humiliation as public as possible. But what was his endgame? What did he get out of all this, other than the sick satisfaction of watching my life implode? As I replayed our fight in my mind, something Alan had said stuck out to me. I exposed the truth. He wasn't just talking about the affair. He was talking about something deeper, something more. What was it that Alan believed he had exposed? My thoughts churned, trying to make sense of it all. I stopped at a red light and pulled out my phone, scrolling through my missed calls and texts from Sarah. One of the messages caught my eye. Alan's been after you for months. He's planning something bigger. Please talk to me. I know how we can stop him. My pulse quickened. What did she know? And why hadn't she told me this before? Was this another lie? Another attempt to manipulate me into forgiving her? I needed answers, but I wasn't ready to face her again just yet. Instead, I did the only thing I could think of. I dialed the one person I trusted, Lori, a close friend who had worked with Alan long enough to know the real story. The phone rang twice before she picked up. Tom? What's going on? I've been hearing rumors about what happened at the conference. I let out a bitter laugh. You heard, huh? Alan made sure everyone would. There was a pause on the other end. I've known Alan for years, and I've never seen him do something like this. He's always been cutthroat, but this is personal. What the hell happened? That's what I'm trying to figure out. I muttered, running a hand through my hair. He's been plotting this for months, Lori. Sarah told me he wanted to ruin my life. But why? What did I ever do to him? Lori hesitated. It's not just you, Tom. Alan's been under a lot of pressure lately. He's made enemies in high places, and he's been looking for someone to take the fall. I don't know the full story, but I think he's trying to cover something up. I froze. Cover something up, yeah. She continued. There's a big internal investigation going on, and Alan's name has been floating around. I don't know the details, but I heard he's been desperate to pin the blame on someone else. Maybe that's why he came after you. My blood ran cold. So, he's trying to ruin me to save himself? It looks that way. Lori said softly. Tom, you need to be careful. Alan's dangerous when his back is against the wall. The pieces were finally starting to fit together. Alan hadn't just come after me out of jealousy, he was trying to use me as a scapegoat. And Sarah, she had been his pawn. But now that I knew the truth, I wasn't going to let him get away with it. The drive back home was long, dark, and silent. The city lights blurred into streaks of orange and white as I sped down the highway, my mind racing faster than the car itself. The rage I had felt earlier was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but something had shifted. Lori's words echoed in my head. Alan's dangerous when his back is against the wall. And Sarah's message. Alan's been after you for months. He's planning something bigger. Suddenly, the pieces began to fall into place. Alan's sick power play wasn't just about humiliating me, it was about survival. He was being investigated, and he needed someone to take the fall. Someone he hated. Someone he could control. And Sarah. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as I thought about her, about the tears in her eyes, the desperation in her voice when she told me she had been trying to protect me. She had known, long before I did, that Alan was after me. She had been trying to stop him, to keep him from destroying my life, and in the process she had let herself get pulled into his twisted game. I could hear her words in my mind, broken and tearful. He said he could destroy you. I thought if I gave him what he wanted, he would leave you alone. I had been so consumed by my own anger, my own pain, that I hadn't truly heard her. All I could see was her betrayal, the image of her with Alan playing over and over in my mind like a nightmare I couldn't escape. But now, as I drove through the empty streets, the pieces began to shift. Sarah hadn't been acting out of selfishness. She had been trying to save me in the only way she thought she could. She had sacrificed herself for me. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut, and I nearly had to pull over as the weight of it settled on my chest. I had been so blinded by my own anger that I hadn't seen it. Sarah wasn't the villain in this story, Alan was. He had manipulated her, preyed on her fears, and used her as a weapon against me. And I had fallen right into his trap. Guilt churned in my stomach as I thought about the things I had said to her, the way I had lashed out, blaming her for everything. Yes, she had made a terrible mistake, but she had been caught in Alan's web just as much as I had. And I hadn't given her the chance to explain, not really. I needed to fix this. I needed to make things right, not just with Sarah, but with everything. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my mind was clearer than it had been in days. I knew what I had to do. The rage that had driven me earlier had morphed into something sharper, more focused. Alan had underestimated us. He thought he had broken me, that he had won. But he was wrong. If anyone was going to be ruined by this, it was going to be him. I stepped out of the car, the cool night air biting at my skin as I made my way to the front door. My heart pounded in my chest, but this time it wasn't from anger, it was from the realization of what I had to do next. I opened the door, and there she was, still sitting on the couch, her knees drawn up to her chest, her eyes swollen and red from crying. She looked up as I entered, her face filled with fear and uncertainty, as if she didn't know what was coming next. I stood there for a moment, just looking at her. The woman I had loved for over a decade, the woman I had shared my life with. I had been so angry, so hurt, that I had forgotten what we meant to each other. But now, seeing her like this, broken, vulnerable, I realized that despite everything, I still loved her. "Sarah," I said softly, my voice catching in my throat. She didn't move at first, just stared at me, waiting for whatever terrible words I might throw at her next. But I wasn't here to hurt her anymore. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes widened in shock. "What? I'm sorry," I repeated, stepping closer. "I was so angry I didn't listen to you. I didn't understand." Tears welled up in her eyes again, but this time they weren't tears of fear. She stood up slowly, her hands trembling as she wiped her face. "Tom, I'm so sorry for everything. I never meant to hurt you. I thought," she broke off, sobbing, her body shaking. "I thought I could protect you." I closed the distance between us and pulled her into my arms, holding her as she cried. "I know," I whispered into her hair. "I know you were trying to help. And I'm sorry I didn't see that." She clung to me, her fingers digging into my shirt as if she was afraid I might slip away. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," she choked out. I don't know if I can ever forget what happened," I interrupted, my voice soft but firm. "But I understand now why you did it. Alan manipulated you. He used you. And now, we need to make sure he pays for what he's done." She pulled back slightly, looking up at me with tear-filled eyes. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath, my mind racing with the possibilities. "Alan thinks he's won. He thinks he's destroyed me. But he's made enemies. Lori told me there's an investigation going on. He's trying to pin something on me to cover his own tracks." Sarah nodded slowly, her eyes narrowing as the realization dawned on her. "He's trying to protect himself, by destroying you, exactly," I said, my voice hardening. "But we're not going to let him get away with it. We're going to fight back." Sarah's breath hitched as she looked at me, the weight of everything finally sinking in. "How?" she asked, her voice barely audible. I took her hands in mine, squeezing them gently. "We need to get evidence, real evidence that shows what he's been doing, how he's been targeting me. You were close to him, you must know something. Anything we can use." Her eyes widened, and she nodded slowly. "He mentioned things, when we were together. He said something about paperwork, documents. I don't know, but he's been hiding things. I'm sure of it." I nodded, my mind whirling with possibilities. "We'll need to get into his office, find those documents. Anything that ties him to the investigation. Once we have that, we can expose him for who he really is." Sarah looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "Do you really think we can take him down?" I met her gaze, my voice firm and steady. "We have to. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like we had a way out. Alan had underestimated both of us. He thought he had broken us. But now, standing here with Sarah, I realized that we were stronger together. He had played his hand, but now it was our turn. We were going to make sure Alan lost everything. The next morning, everything felt different. There was a calmness between Sarah and me, a sense of purpose that hadn't existed since this nightmare began. The anger and betrayal that had once torn us apart had transformed into something else: focus, determination, a shared goal. Alan had destroyed my career, my reputation, and almost my marriage, but now, we were going to destroy him. We spent hours that morning planning, talking through everything Sarah knew about Alan and the company. She had been close to him, closer than I ever imagined, and through their interactions, she had picked up pieces of information, half-hidden conversations, off-the-record remarks, documents she had glimpsed but hadn't fully understood. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give us a starting point. "His office," I said, pacing the living room as we pieced together the plan. "We need to get into his office. The files he's hiding are there, I'm sure of it." Sarah nodded, her eyes still puffy from all the tears she had shed, but now filled with a new kind of determination. "He kept a safe in there. I saw him lock it a few times, but he was careful never to let anyone see what was inside. Whatever he's hiding, it's there." I stopped pacing and looked at her. "Do you remember the combination?" She bit her lip, thinking. "He was so arrogant. He would use his birthday for everything. I bet it's the same for the safe. He always bragged that no one would ever guess something so obvious." I smirked. Alan had always underestimated everyone around him, and now his arrogance was going to be his downfall. "If we can get into that safe, we'll have everything we need." Later that afternoon, we were ready. The company office was mostly empty, it being the weekend, and I knew Alan wouldn't be there. He was always at some private country club or high-end party on Saturdays. This gave us the perfect window to get inside his office without raising suspicion. Sarah and I arrived at the building together, our steps quiet and deliberate as we entered the lobby. She had her keycard, the one Alan had given her back when he trusted her implicitly. As the elevator doors closed, my heart pounded in my chest, but I kept my face calm. We were about to break into the office of the man who had almost ruined my life. Now it was time to return the favor. The elevator ride felt like an eternity, the silence between us thick with anticipation. When the doors slid open, we walked briskly toward Alan's office, the hallway eerily quiet. My eyes darted around, looking for any sign of security, but there was none. Just as Sarah had said, the building was practically deserted. We reached Alan's office, and Sarah swiped her keycard. The lock clicked open with a faint beep, and the door swung inward, revealing the sleek, modern space where Alan conducted his daily operations. My hands clenched into fists at the thought of everything he had done here, how he had plotted against me, planned to ruin my career, my marriage. Sarah led me to the far side of the office, where a large painting hung on the wall. With a swift motion, she pulled it aside, revealing the small, steel safe embedded in the wall. She knelt down in front of it, her fingers shaking slightly as she entered the combination, Alan's birthday. The safe clicked open. My heart raced as I pulled the door wide, revealing a stack of files, several external hard drives, and a few small notebooks. I grabbed everything, my hands moving quickly as Sarah kept watch by the door. "We need to go," she whispered urgently, her voice filled with tension. "If anyone catches us, I know," I muttered, stuffing the documents into my bag. "Just a second." My fingers grazed over one of the hard drives, and I hesitated. There was something written on it in small, neat handwriting: Project Olympus. My breath caught. That was the codename Alan had mentioned during an executive meeting months ago, the project he had been secretly working on. The one no one was supposed to know about. I stuffed the drive into my bag and shut the safe, replacing the painting. We were out the door within seconds, our footsteps quick and silent as we made our way back to the elevator. My heart pounded in my chest, the weight of the documents and hard drives heavy in the bag slung over my shoulder. We had done it. Now it was time to make Alan pay. Back at home, we spread the contents of the safe across the dining room table. There were financial reports, transaction logs, and a slew of incriminating emails between Alan and several high-profile clients. It didn't take long to piece together what was going on. Alan had been embezzling money, skimming off the top of every deal for months, maybe years. He had siphoned off millions from the company and had been using the Project Olympus code name to cover his tracks. "This is it," I said, staring at the documents in disbelief. "This is what he's been hiding." Sarah leaned over my shoulder, her eyes scanning the papers. "He was laundering money, moving funds through fake accounts. That's why he needed you to fall. If anyone ever found out, he needed someone to take the blame." I clenched my fists, the rage I had felt earlier now sharpening into a cold, calculated resolve. Alan had not only tried to ruin me, he had been using the company as his personal piggy bank, lying to everyone, manipulating everything. This was bigger than just personal revenge. "We're going to expose him," I said quietly, my voice filled with purpose. "We're going to take everything he's built and burn it to the ground." Sarah nodded, her eyes gleaming with the same fierce determination. "He deserves it." The following Monday, we put the plan in motion. I sent the documents to key people in the company, executives who had trusted Alan implicitly, shareholders, even the head of the investigation team. Along with it, I attached the hard drive containing all the evidence of Project Olympus. It wasn't long before the emails started flooding in, one after another, asking for explanations, demanding accountability. By midday, Alan's world had started to crumble. It wasn't until later that afternoon that I received the call. Alan's voice on the other end of the line was shaky, desperate. "Tom, we need to talk." I smiled bitterly, my fingers tightening around the phone. "I don't think there's anything left to say, Alan. I've seen everything." There was a long pause on the other end before Alan spoke again, his voice trembling. "Please, please don't do this. Don't ruin me. My career, everything I've worked for, it'll all be over." I leaned back in my chair, the weight of the moment finally hitting me. Alan, the man who had humiliated me, who had plotted to destroy my life, was now begging for mercy. But there would be none. "You ruined my career," I said coldly, my voice steady. "Now I'm going to ruin yours." Alan let out a choked breath, but I didn't wait for him to respond. I hung up the phone and turned to Sarah, who stood by the doorway, watching me with a mixture of relief and satisfaction. "It's done," I said simply. She nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "It's over." The days that followed were a whirlwind of chaos and satisfaction. Alan's world came crashing down faster than I could have imagined. The documents, the financial reports, the emails, everything we had uncovered spread through the company like wildfire. Whispers turned to shouts, and soon everyone knew the truth about Alan. He had been laundering money through the company, using fake projects and offshore accounts to cover his tracks. It wasn't just the executives or shareholders who found out. The media got hold of it, too. Within 48 hours, it was headline news: corporate titan falls and major fraud scandal. Alan's name was everywhere, but not in the way he had always craved. Instead of admiration and respect, he was now the subject of scorn and ridicule. His carefully built empire, the career he had sacrificed everything for, was crumbling around him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. It was everything I had hoped for and more. I stood by the window of our living room, staring out at the street as the sun began to set. The orange glow of dusk bathed the neighborhood in an eerie calm, a stark contrast to the storm of emotions I was feeling inside. Sarah was sitting on the couch behind me, her eyes fixed on her phone, scrolling through the news articles detailing Alan's downfall. "He's finished," she said quietly, her voice almost hollow. "They've suspended him from the company. The board is launching a full investigation, and the police are involved now. He's going to prison, Tom." I nodded slowly, my fingers drumming against the windowsill. The satisfaction I had imagined, the triumph of seeing Alan brought to his knees was there, but it was also tinged with something else. A strange emptiness. We had won. We had taken Alan down, just as we had planned. But the damage he had caused, the pain, the betrayal, it still lingered. Even now, after everything, I couldn't shake the weight of it. I turned away from the window and looked at Sarah. She glanced up at me, her eyes filled with a mix of relief and uncertainty. We had been through so much, but there was still a long road ahead of us. The revenge had been sweet, but it hadn't erased the hurt. "How are you feeling?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. She set her phone down on the coffee table and sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I don't know," she admitted. "It feels strange. I thought I'd be happy, knowing that he's getting what he deserves. But all I can think about is everything that's happened, everything that we've lost." I nodded, understanding all too well. "I know. It doesn't just go away." She looked at me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Tom, I can't tell you how sorry I am. I know I've said it 1,000 times, but I need you to know that I would do anything to make this right." I took a deep breath, the anger I had once felt toward her now replaced with something more complicated: sadness, yes, but also a deep, unshakable connection. We had been through hell together, and somehow, we had come out the other side. But it didn't mean the wounds weren't still there. "I believe you," I said softly, crossing the room and sitting beside her. "It's going to take time, Sarah." "What happened?" "I don't know if we can ever fully get past it. But I'm willing to try. We've come this far." Her lips trembled, and she blinked back tears. "I love you, Tom." I never stopped. I reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "I love you too," I said, the words coming more easily than I expected. "We'll figure this out together." She nodded, a small, hopeful smile breaking through the tears. We sat in silence for a while, both of us reflecting on everything that had led us to this moment. Alan had tried to destroy us, but he had failed. We had survived. And now, for the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to feel hopeful about the future. The next morning, I received another phone call from Alan. I was surprised he still had the nerve to reach out after everything that had happened. I let it ring for a few moments before answering. "What do you want, Alan?" My voice was steady, but there was no trace of the anger that had once consumed me. He no longer had any power over me. "Tom, please." His voice was barely a whisper, broken and hollow. "You've destroyed me. I've lost everything: my job, my reputation, my future. Please. I'll do anything. Don't let this go any further. I'm begging you." The desperation in his voice was palpable, and for a brief moment, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't expected: pity. But it was fleeting. Alan had made his choices. He had set this entire nightmare in motion, and now he was reaping the consequences. "You're begging me?" I said, my voice cold and measured. "You humiliated me in front of the entire company. You tried to destroy my career, my marriage, my life. And now you're asking me for mercy." "Please, Tom," Alan choked out, his voice cracking. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I was wrong. I can see that now. I'll do anything, just don't ruin me completely. I still have a chance to rebuild. I just need time." I closed my eyes, letting his words wash over me. This was the man who had taken everything from me, the man who had tried to turn my life into a living hell. And now, he was the one on his knees, begging for forgiveness. But there would be none. "You ruined my career, Alan," I said, my voice low and steady. "Now I'm going to ruin yours. Just like you tried to do to me." He let out a sob on the other end of the line, but I didn't wait for him to respond. I ended the call and set my phone down on the table, feeling the weight of finality settle over me. It was over. The fallout from Alan's scandal was swift and unforgiving. He was fired from the company within days, his name forever tarnished by the financial crimes he had committed. The police investigation revealed even more than we had expected: embezzlement, fraud, tax evasion. He was arrested within a week, and the charges piled up as more evidence came to light. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. The weight of Alan's betrayal, the humiliation, the anger, it was all starting to fade. Sarah and I still had a long way to go, but we were working through it, one day at a time. We had faced the worst, and we had survived. And as for Alan, his empire had crumbled, and there was no rebuilding it. We had won. Alan's fall from grace was swift and brutal, just as he had tried to do to me. He had manipulated, deceived, and used everyone around him, believing he was untouchable. But in the end, his arrogance and cruelty led to his own destruction. Sarah and I had fought through the storm, pieced together the broken fragments of our marriage, and faced the man who tried to tear us apart. It wasn't easy, and the scars of betrayal would remain, but we had come out stronger. We had learned to trust again, slowly but surely, and now the nightmare that Alan had tried to create for us was over. Alan, on the other hand, would never recover. His empire crumbled, his reputation destroyed. The man who thought he could control everything was left with nothing. It was the revenge I never imagined seeking, but it was the justice he deserved. Revenge may bring satisfaction, but it's never the full solution to emotional pain. In situations of betrayal, the hardest and most important step is to regain control of your own life, whether by rebuilding trust or walking away from what no longer serves you. Open, honest communication is essential to heal the wounds that infidelity can cause. If reconciliation is possible, it takes time, patience, and effort from both sides. Most importantly, never lose sight of your own self-worth. Rebuilding yourself after betrayal is the best revenge and a way to move forward with dignity.